Welcome, the Lord's chosen. Some of you didn't just survive the last season. You unknowingly sat for an exam heaven never told you about, and you passed. There are moments in life that don't feel like moments at all. They feel like chaos, delay, betrayal, embarrassment, or just plain confusion. You called it a bad year, an attack, bad luck, or my villain origin story. Meanwhile, in the unseen, it was something else entirely, a divine assessment, a secret exam, a quiet evaluation of who you really are when God seems silent, when prayers hit walls, and when nothing on paper suggests you're chosen for anything except stress. Here's a crazy fact. Psychologists say we make a huge portion of our life's biggest decisions in heightened emotional states, when we're hurt, angry, afraid, or desperate. In other words, your weakest moments are often the loudest crossroads. Now imagine God watching those exact moments, not to condemn you, but to see, will you sell your soul for relief, or will you stay aligned, even when it costs you? That's not superstition. That's data heaven uses to decide what doors you're ready to walk through. And the wild part, you don't get a notification. Congratulations, beloved. You are now entering your big test. Please press 1 to continue. No. You just wake up one day, everything feels off. The people you counted on act weird. Opportunities evaporate and your plans do backflips without your consent. You think you're being punished. But in reality, God is quietly grading something more important than your comfort, your character, your loyalty, your integrity, your response to his silence. While you were wondering, God, what are you doing with my life? Heaven was asking a different question. What will you do with me in your life when nothing I'm doing makes sense to you? That's the secret exam. Not how loud you can shout, I'm chosen. Not how many scriptures you can post on your story, but how you carry yourself when you feel overlooked, delayed, misunderstood, and under spiritual fire with no clear ETA on your breakthrough. The irony is almost funny, almost. You thought you were failing at life because doors kept closing, people kept leaving, and your timeline looked nothing like your expectations. Meanwhile, God was like, look at my child saying no to shortcuts, letting go of toxic attachments, choosing obedience over clout, and not turning bitter even when they had every excuse. Yeah, this one is passing with distinction. You were busy stressing over what you lost. Heaven was quietly stamping your file, approved for next dimension. So if your recent journey has felt like a mix of spiritual boot camp, emotional demolition, and a reality show you never auditioned for, you're not crazy, and you're not behind. You've been sitting for an exam in the dark, and now something is shifting. New doors, strange favor, unexpected opportunities, divine connections. Things you didn't chase are about to start looking for you, not because you're lucky, but because you're ready. In this video, we're going to break down how God's chosen ones are tested in secret, what you unknowingly passed, and why life-changing doors are about to open, not as a random surprise, but as a direct response to the version of you that emerged from the fire. Buckle up. You didn't just survive your last season. You qualified for your next one. Number 1, you weren't lucky. God tested what you do when he is silent. There's a side of being chosen that nobody puts on posters. It's not the prophecies, open doors, and answers to prayer. It's the long, uncomfortable stretch where heaven feels quiet and life feels unfair. That season where you wondered if God lost your file or put you on some kind of divine waiting list. You saw other people getting breakthroughs while you were stuck on scene. It felt like punishment. It wasn't. It was an exam. Not the kind of exam where you sit in a classroom and get a paper. This one came disguised as unanswered prayers, delayed promises, and a kind of silence that made you question if you were still on God's radar. You would pray and feel nothing. You would worship and feel dry. You would seek direction and get no clear sign. That was the test. What do you do when God doesn't explain himself? Many people only stay faithful as long as God feels useful. Once he stops doing what they expect, they quietly switch gods. Money, attention, people's approval, shortcuts, whatever works. You had every chance to do the same. You could have compromised, manipulated, chased clout, or numbed your pain with distractions. But you didn't. You had your weak days, you had your tears, you had your "God, I don't get this" moments, but you didn't abandon him for another source. That's what heaven was watching. Not just your church attendance, not the scriptures you posted, but the quiet decisions, the temptation you walked away from, the bitterness you refused to feed, the secret envy you let God deal with, the times you still chose to pray when you felt nothing back. On paper, it looked like nothing changed. In the spirit, everything changed. You didn't pass this exam by being perfect. You passed it by staying when it was dry, by staying when it was confusing, by staying when it would have been easier to bow to something else. That's not luck, that's proof. And that proof is exactly why life-changing doors are about to open for you now. Number 2, you passed because you didn't worship outcomes. You worshipped him. Most people think being chosen or blessed is about what God gives you. They pray for promotions, relationships, money, recognition, healing, and favor. When the blessings come, they feel validated, and when they don't, doubt creeps in. But your journey was different. Your faith wasn't built on what you would get. It was built on who he is. That's why you passed this part of the secret exam. You went through moments when life felt unfair. You didn't get the opportunities you expected, doors stayed closed, and people who should have been allies vanished. Every day had reasons for bitterness, resentment, and complaining. Every delay screamed that maybe your prayers didn't matter. Most people in that situation would start negotiating with God. Okay, if you bless me now, I'll behave. If you fix this, I'll serve you better. You didn't. You stayed consistent even when there was no immediate payoff. Your worship didn't depend on circumstances. You praised without visible results. You obeyed without applause. You stayed loyal even when it would have made more sense to take shortcuts, manipulate situations, or chase easier alternatives. That loyalty was your mark of distinction. God was testing not what you could gain, but what you could give him. Your integrity, your commitment, your heart that chooses him over everything else. This is why the doors opening for you now aren't random. They are direct responses to a faith that wasn't transactional. You didn't chase the prize, you chased him. You didn't measure success by what showed up in your life. You measured it by how steadfast your heart stayed through every delay, denial, and disappointment. You proved that blessings are not what define you, obedience and alignment do. That kind of faith is rare. That kind of faith gets noticed in the unseen places and rewarded in ways no one else can orchestrate. You didn't just pass this season by holding on. You passed it by letting go of the need for visible validation and letting your devotion exist independently of outcomes. That alone is what qualifies you for the life-changing doors about to swing open. Doors that aren't about temporary gain, but about destiny that recognizes who you became in the quiet. Number 3, you outgrew the bait, and that's why the warfare felt personal. Some of the hardest moments in life aren't random. The fights, the disappointments, the betrayals, they come at you with a precision that feels almost personal. That's because they are. The struggles you faced weren't always meant to punish you. They were designed to test whether you would repeat the patterns of your past. The old tricks, the familiar traps, the same weaknesses that used to control you, they came back not by accident, but as a measure of your growth. You were tempted in ways that felt like déjà vu. The same toxic people tried to manipulate you. The same habits whispered your old name, and the same fears tried to convince you that you hadn't changed at all. This was no ordinary struggle. This was God giving life a deeper exam. The question wasn't whether you could survive temptation, but whether you could survive without being the person you used to be. Every challenge was calibrated to your past self. Every attack tested whether you had truly grown or whether old patterns could reclaim you. You didn't just survive these moments. You responded differently. Where fear would have once caused you to react impulsively, you remained patient. Where anger would have once taken control, you stayed composed. Where bitterness could have taken root, you chose clarity over chaos. You didn't simply dodge the trap. You evolved past the need for it. That's why the struggles felt personal. They were tailored to see if the new you would crumble under the weight of old battles. Outgrowing the bait is a quiet victory. It's invisible to those around you, but monumental in the unseen realm. You learned not just to resist, but to rise above the patterns that once defined you. You proved that what used to break you no longer has power over you. That's why doors are about to open that others only dream of. The spiritual systems that used to block you can't touch you anymore. You've passed the test not because life got easier, but because you got stronger. The old bait no longer works, and the life waiting for you is proof that personal growth is the ultimate key to unlocking what was always meant for you. Number 4, you didn't just keep the faith. You let God kill your version of the story. Most people say they trust God, but what they really mean is they trust Him to confirm their plans, timelines, and expectations. They want His blessings, but only in the package they already designed for themselves. You didn't do that. Your journey demanded something far deeper: surrender. God dismantled your schedules, disrupted your comfort zones, took away what you thought was essential, and challenged you to let go of your personal blueprint for life. It wasn't easy. Letting go of what you worked for, what you envisioned, and what you believed was the right way, hurt. It felt unfair at times, like life had flipped the script without warning. But you didn't resist the rewriting. You didn't bargain or cling to a fantasy version of your life. You grieved the loss, accepted the void, and allowed God to craft a story that went beyond your imagination. That willingness to surrender, even when it meant uncertainty and discomfort, was the true measure of your faith. This wasn't just about patience. It was about trust that runs deeper than hope. You learned to follow God without needing constant reassurance that the outcome would match your expectations. You discovered that obedience and surrender are more valuable than control and comfort. By releasing your story into His hands, you proved that your faith is genuine, not dependent on visible results or personal agendas. Because of this, God can now trust you with what He has next. Your future won't just be a continuation of what you had. It will be a leap into something 10 times greater than anything you could have imagined or settled for. You passed this test by showing that your allegiance is to Him, not to your own designs. That is why the doors opening ahead are not just opportunities. They are a divine response to a heart that didn't cling to the old story, but embraced a future written by the author himself. Number 5, you refused to become what hurt you, and that's why your authority is real. Life tested you in ways that left marks most people carry their entire lives. You were betrayed by those you trusted, misunderstood by those who should have known better, used by those who took without giving, overlooked by people who should have recognized your value, and maybe even slandered in ways that shook your confidence. The exam wasn't just about whether you could endure these trials. It was about what you would become because of them. The real question was never, can you survive? It was, will you mutate into what hurt you? So many people respond to pain by becoming its mirror. They manipulate because they were manipulated. They grow cold because they were rejected. They seek revenge because they were wronged. Pain often breeds imitation of itself, turning victims into villains. But you didn't. Even when the urge to fight fire with fire, bitterness with bitterness, or cruelty with cruelty tugged at your spirit, you resisted. You refused to let your pain define your character or dictate your actions. You chose healing over hardness, restoration over resentment, and integrity over retaliation. That choice is rare. That choice is what sets apart those who truly lead from those who simply survive. By refusing to be reshaped by your wounds, you became someone capable of authority in ways that go beyond position or title. You didn't just endure pain, you transformed it into power, insight, and wisdom. You now carry influence over the very patterns, people, and circumstances that once tried to control you. The authority you hold isn't borrowed, earned through fear, or dependent on circumstance. It is real because it comes from mastery over yourself, mastery over your response to life's harshest lessons, and mastery over the destructive cycles that once sought to claim you. Your ability to remain unbroken, unbitter, and uncompromised is proof that the exam was passed. The trials weren't detours, they were preparation. And now, because you refused to become the reflection of your pain, you are qualified to walk into spaces, lead wisely, and influence powerfully, without ever being dominated by the very forces that tried to shape you. Number 6, you accepted hiddenness instead of forcing visibility. That was your humility test. You've been living in a world that constantly screams, be seen or be nothing. Post it, prove it, explain it, defend it, sell it. If people don't see it, it doesn't count. That's the language of this generation. But you moved differently. You had chances to make noise, clap back, over-explain, show receipts, and prove your worth to people who misjudged you. In moments where you could have dragged everything into the spotlight, you chose something that looks weak on the surface but is terrifyingly powerful in the spirit. You stayed hidden when your ego wanted attention. There were seasons where your efforts went unnoticed, your loyalty went unappreciated, your growth went uncelebrated. Others were posting highlight reels while you were living in what felt like backstage obscurity, not because you weren't gifted, but because God was testing what you truly craved, validation from the crowd or approval from Him. You could have forced visibility. You could have exaggerated, networked in desperation, attached yourself to people just for access, or curated a version of yourself that looked louder than your actual life. But you didn't. You let your process be private and your roots grow deep. That restraint was not passivity, it was maturity. You allowed misinterpretations to stand without launching a campaign to clean your name. You allowed your work, your consistency, and your integrity to speak over time instead of demanding instant applause. You chose to believe that if God really called you, He didn't need help building your brand at the expense of your character. That's spiritual intelligence. You understood that premature exposure can destroy what hasn't been properly formed. Heaven watched you take the slow route without resenting those who took shortcuts. It watched you value depth over display, transformation over impression, and real anointing over online aesthetics. That was your humility test. And because you passed it, the doors that open next won't be based on hype or algorithm. They'll be tied to assignment. You won't enter rooms trying to prove you deserve to be there. You'll enter rooms because you were sent there. That kind of elevation doesn't collapse under pressure because it wasn't built on noise. It was built on obedience, hiddenness, and a God who knows exactly where you are. Number 7, you let God confront your ego, not just your enemies. A lot of people love spiritual warfare as long as it's about them, the haters, the demons, the jealous ones, the witches, the fake friends. It feels satisfying to point outward. But your last season went deeper than that. God didn't just put a spotlight on your enemies. He put a spotlight on you, not to shame you, but to heal what would have quietly sabotaged your future. He started showing you parts of yourself that were not as holy as your image. The control issues you disguised as wisdom. The insecurity you covered with over-explaining or over-performing. The entitlement that said, "I deserve this by now." The self-righteousness that made you feel secretly superior to people who weren't as disciplined or deep as you. None of this was fun to see. It's much easier to cry about being attacked than to admit some of my pain came from my own pride, my own decisions, my own blind spots. But you didn't run from that mirror. You didn't slam it shut with excuses like, "That's just how I am," or "At least I'm better than I used to be," or "Other people are worse." You let conviction do its work. You allowed God to correct your tone, your motives, your reactions, your internal conversations. You stopped only praying, "Lord, deal with those against me," and started praying, "Lord, deal with what's wrong in me." That shift alone placed you in a different category. Heaven took note of that posture. Because here's the truth. Heavy doors require healed hearts. Promotion without inner work is a setup for collapse. God loves you too much to expose you widely while your ego is still fragile, touchy, easily offended, desperate to be seen or needing constant validation. In this season, you let him sand down those edges, confront your spiritual stubbornness, and strip away the parts of you that wanted the spotlight more than his will. That's why what's coming next won't destroy you. You won't walk through new doors with a shaky identity and a defensive spirit. You'll walk through them more grounded, more self-aware, more surrendered. Your next level won't be built on, "Look at me," but on, "Lord, use me." That's the kind of vessel God can trust with platforms, influence, and responsibility. Because you didn't just resist your enemies, you humbled your ego. Number 8, you chose alignment over attachment, and heaven took notes. Life has a way of testing loyalty in the trickiest places. Often, the hardest choices aren't about right versus wrong in the moral sense. They're about staying attached to people, habits, or environments that feel familiar but no longer serve your growth. What once brought comfort started feeling like chains. What once felt like home began to suffocate your spirit. You were faced with the quiet, brutal question. Will you stay where your soul is slowly dying just because your flesh feels safe? It's one thing to let go of toxic people or destructive habits. It's another to release relationships, routines, and spaces you still loved deeply, knowing that your attachment wasn't aligned with your destiny. That tension, heart versus spirit, is one of the most painful exams you can face. Letting go required courage that few understand. It required trusting God more than your feelings, more than the comfort of what you already knew. You had to grieve, accept the void, and walk forward without the safety net of familiarity. That was brutal, but it was holy. Every time you chose alignment over attachment, heaven took note. Every time you refused to cling to what looked good but didn't feel right, God logged it as proof that you could handle environments designed for purpose, not just pleasure. That's why doors are about to open in places where your calling fits perfectly, not where your comfort has settled, not where your heart clings, but where your spirit can thrive. You learned a lesson many never grasp. Comfort is seductive, but alignment is powerful. Choosing what feels right to your soul over what feels safe to your body isn't easy, and it isn't popular, but it's what separates those who stumble into destiny from those who walk into it intentionally. Because you made the hard choice, the universe and heaven now has the green light to connect you to people, opportunities, and spaces that match not just who you are, but who you were created to become. Number 9. You didn't just ask for blessings, you submitted to pruning. Everyone talks about wanting blessings, promotions, and breakthroughs, but very few are willing to go through pruning. God's pruning isn't always gentle. It doesn't always come with fanfare or clear explanations. It comes as removal. He cuts away the things that look alive but aren't truly producing the kind of fruit that lasts. Ideas, plans, roles, routines, even identities that once made you feel significant. He started taking them away. It felt like loss, it felt confusing, it felt unfair. But pruning isn't punishment, it's preparation. Many people would have argued, resisted, or blamed God. Many would have clung to what looked good instead of what was truly fruitful. But you didn't. You allowed the process. You let him strip away leaves, habits, and attachments that had outlived their purpose, even when it left you feeling exposed, empty, or unsure of your next step. That willingness to be pruned, to allow what is unnecessary to fall, was the quiet exam that few even notice. Most of life's tests happen in public with applause or condemnation. This one was silent, and it was about maturity, patience, and faith in God's timing. Through pruning, you learned the difference between mere growth and genuine fruitfulness. You discovered that increase without preparation isn't a blessing, it's a risk. Without pruning, the weight of what comes next could have crushed you, inflated dysfunction in your life, or set you up to fail. But your submission shows that you are ready for more than random opportunities or hollow successes. The doors opening for you now won't be luck or coincidence. They are targeted environments designed for the fruit in you to flourish. God can trust that what he plants in your life will grow solid roots because you've already proven you can let go of what doesn't belong. You didn't just ask for increase, you proved that you can handle it responsibly, and that is exactly why what comes next will be substantial, meaningful, and lasting. Number 10, you stayed honest with God when you couldn't be impressive for people. Life can be exhausting when everyone around you expects perfection, strength, and constant victories. Social media highlights, public praise, and appearances create pressure to always look composed, capable, and together. But your test wasn't about performing for people. It was about how real you could be with God when no one was watching. There were days you prayed messy prayers, cried mid-sentence, sang worship without feeling anything, admitted your doubts and whispered, "God, I'm tired." That was your exam, and you didn't run from it. Many people equate passing life's spiritual test with appearing strong, flawless, or spiritually impressive. In the kingdom, the truth is different. Passing often looks like refusing to fake it. It's dragging your brokenness, confusion, and exhaustion into God's presence and letting him deal with the rawness instead of performing for others. That kind of honesty requires humility, courage, and a willingness to be vulnerable in private spaces. You didn't disconnect from God when you felt weak. You stayed, exposed, and surrendered, proving that your relationship with him isn't built on facade or appearances. That authenticity kept your connection real. Heaven doesn't respond to polished performances or the fake version of you that gets attention from people. God responds to surrendered hearts, honesty, and those willing to meet him in the quiet, messy, and unseen moments. By refusing to perform, by letting him see the real you, you pass the part of the exam that tests integrity and faithfulness in hidden places. The doors opening for you now won't favor a polished image or public approval. They favor the genuine, raw, surrendered version of you, the one who stayed consistent with God even when life didn't make sense, even when prayers seemed unanswered, and even when your energy felt depleted. That honesty isn't just a test passed. It's proof that you're ready for assignments, opportunities, and blessings that align with the real you, not the version you pretend to be for others. Number 11, you outlasted the expiration date of certain attacks. Some battles were never meant to stick around as long as they did. They lingered, resurfaced, and repeated themselves, because they were tied to generational patterns, old cycles, or spiritual assignments that had been passed down or left unresolved. The test wasn't about having the perfect prayer or shouting the right words once. The real exam was about endurance. Could you stay standing when the attack became repetitive, exhausting, and emotionally draining? Could you remain steadfast when it felt like life kept recycling the same challenges over and over again? You didn't give up. You didn't quit after the first disappointment, the second delay, or the third closed door. You didn't allow yourself to be defined by the frustration, the unfairness, or the discouragement. Instead, you stayed consistent, showing resilience when it would have been easier to crumble, complain, or compromise. That's rare, and that's what separates a person who survives from one who is spiritually prepared for elevation. Outlasting these cycles wasn't just a test of patience, it was a demonstration of authority. When a believer outlives a cycle, that cycle loses legal access to their future. The patterns that once dictated setbacks, failures, and delays no longer have dominion over your life. What tried to oppress, discourage, or manipulate your trajectory now falls flat, powerless against the endurance you cultivated. This is why the doors opening for you now will feel strange to the old patterns that tried to control you. Those attacks, those cycles, those delays, they won't follow you into this next season. You passed the hidden test of perseverance, proving that you are no longer bound by what previously held you back. The battles that lingered for so long have expired, and now your future moves freely into the open. The persistence, patience, and faithfulness you displayed in the dark have set the stage for opportunities that cannot be obstructed by anything that used to try to define your limits. Number 12. You learn to separate God's character from your circumstances. One of the toughest tests you faced was learning that life doesn't always make sense. Everywhere you looked, it seemed like the world was upside down. People who acted selfishly prospered. Dishonest individuals gained opportunities you had been praying for. The unfairness of it all could have easily shaken your faith or warped your understanding of who God really is. Most people, when faced with this, start redefining God's goodness to match their pain. They assume that if life is messy, he must be absent, indifferent, or unjust. But you didn't do that. You held on to a higher standard. You refused to downgrade God's character to fit your disappointment. Even when your emotions and circumstances screamed betrayal, delay, or injustice, you leaned on his word rather than the evidence around you. You discovered that faith isn't just about believing God exists. It's about trusting that his nature is consistent, even when life contradicts what your eyes see or what your feelings feel. This test wasn't easy. It required endurance, patience, and a level of spiritual maturity that most people avoid. It demanded that you detach your perception of God from the chaos around you and anchor it in the truth of his unchanging character. You had to walk through seasons of confusion without letting doubt define him, and you had to stand in silence when life seemed unfair without shrinking from faith. By passing this test, you proved that your trust is rooted in reality, not convenience. You can now receive what's coming next with clarity and confidence, because your understanding of God has been refined. The doors about to open won't just bless your life materially or emotionally, they will restore and redeem your perception of him. You will finally see that he has been faithful the entire time, even when circumstances tried to tell you otherwise. Your faith has matured, and now your rewards will reflect a trust that could withstand any test life throws at you. Number 13. Your obedience in small, unseen instructions unlocked large, visible doors. This is the part almost nobody talks about, because it's not flashy, it's not dramatic, and it doesn't look powerful on camera. It's the quiet stuff, the gentle nudge you feel in your spirit. Delete that number. Don't send that text. Don't reply to that message. Give that money. Apologize first. Turn that video off. Wake up and pray now. No thunder, no lightning, no open vision. Just a soft, annoying, inconvenient pull that doesn't come with an explanation. Those moments looked small, but heaven treated them like an exam. Not a test of how loud you can shout, but of how deeply you can obey. You didn't always get it perfect, but you took those nudges seriously. While others brushed them off as just my thoughts or that's not a big deal, you started treating them as if they mattered. That right there is rare. You didn't wait for a crisis to obey. You obeyed in the boring, ordinary, Tuesday afternoon, no audience moments. People see stage moments, the promotion, the breakthrough, the open door, the testimony, the platform. God sees kitchen moments, what you watched when nobody was home, bedroom moments, what you entertained when everyone was asleep, phone moments, what you deleted because you knew it was slowly killing your spirit, wallet moments, what you gave when no one would say thank you, pride moments, who you humbled yourself to text, call, or reconcile with just because God said so. Every yes in those hidden places was a seed. You didn't know which seed would turn into what. You just kept saying yes. Yes to discomfort. Yes to conviction. Yes to letting go. Yes to boundaries that made you look extra or too deep to people who didn't understand. You passed the test because you didn't treat those instructions as optional. You treated them as sacred. Now you're about to see the strange, beautiful side of that obedience. Doors are going to open that don't match your resume, your connections, or your qualifications. Favor is going to show up in rooms you didn't even know existed, not because you hustled your way into them, but because your private obedience has reached its public harvest time. God is about to make it obvious that those small, quiet, hidden decisions were never random. They were keys, and you used them. Number 14, you proved you can carry revelation without using it to dominate others. Now God can trust you with influence. One of the quiet turning points in your journey was when God started sharpening your discernment. You began to see through things more clearly, people's motives, hidden agendas, unhealthy patterns in relationships, manipulation dressed up as care, spiritual immaturity dressed up as deep, emotional immaturity disguised as realness. Suddenly the fog started lifting. You weren't as easily fooled. You could pick up on what others missed. That alone was a test. Revelation is a powerful thing. Once you start seeing what others don't, the temptation is to feel superior, to speak down on people, to expose and embarrass, to use what you know as a way to feel bigger than everyone else in the room. Many fail that test. They use insight as a weapon, not a responsibility. They gossip prophetically, call out people just to feel important, or secretly enjoy knowing more than everyone else. But you didn't go that route. You didn't use what God showed you to humiliate people, control them, or build a private throne in your head where you sit above everyone else. You let what you saw humble you, not inflate you. When God exposed manipulation, you didn't run to blast it publicly. You tightened your boundaries and guarded your peace. When you saw spiritual or emotional immaturity, you didn't mock it. You prayed wiser, engaged differently, and stopped forcing connections that were draining you. Your discernment made you kinder, clearer, and more precise, not cold, arrogant, or cruel. Heaven watched that. You treated revelation as a tool, not a crown. You chose to let insight refine your choices instead of becoming an excuse to judge, gossip, or dominate. That posture is exactly why God can now trust you with more influence, because influence without character becomes spiritual abuse. But influence in the hands of someone who refuses to weaponize revelation becomes healing, guidance, and light. You're being prepared for spaces where your voice will carry weight, not because you're perfect, but because you've proven that when God shows you more, you don't turn it into an ego boost. You turn it into intercession, wisdom, and alignment. You don't crave a throne. You steward a tool. And that's the kind of person God can safely raise up without worrying that they'll crush the very people they were sent to help. Conclusion. You didn't just survive the storms, the delays, the betrayals, or the silence. You passed a secret exam that most people don't even know exists. Every trial, every hidden struggle, every uncomfortable season was a carefully designed test. One that measured your faith, your integrity, your humility, your patience, and your willingness to surrender fully to God's plan. You proved that your loyalty isn't transactional, your obedience isn't conditional, and your character isn't dependent on applause, recognition, or immediate results. You stayed faithful when it was unseen. You remained humble when the world demanded performance, and you let God shape you when everything inside you wanted to control, force, or shortcut the process. You've learned to separate God's character from your circumstances, to outlast cycles that tried to claim you, to embrace pruning instead of rushing for increase, and to honor small, unseen instructions that laid the foundation for massive breakthroughs. You refused to become bitter or harsh when life attacked you, and you didn't weaponize revelation for ego or manipulation. You let God confront your ego, refine your heart, and teach you to lead with wisdom, restraint, and discernment. You chose alignment over attachment, integrity over applause, and depth over display. All of this wasn't random. All of this was preparation. Now, what's coming next is not just a reward for perseverance, it's a recognition of who you have become in the unseen, quiet, and testing seasons. Doors that once seemed closed will open with clarity. Opportunities that seemed delayed will arrive with precision. Favors that were hidden will emerge with impact. And your life will begin to reflect not just what you endured, but what you allowed God to shape within you. The invisible victories, the private battles, the surrendered heart, and the unwavering faith. This is your season of elevation. It's a season where the unseen obedience, humility, patience, and discernment you've cultivated will explode into visible, life-changing outcomes. Heaven has been taking notes, and the alignment of your heart with God's purpose has qualified you for breakthroughs that go far beyond what you could have imagined or prepared for on your own. The life ahead is not just better, it's extraordinary, because it's rooted in a faith that has been tested, refined, and proven. If this message resonates with you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel for more life-changing insights. Like this video to support our work, share it with someone who needs to hear this today, and leave a comment sharing how your journey has prepared you for your next season. Your breakthrough is closer than you think, and it's time to step into it fully. Stay blessed always.